You can't hear reverb. There, I said it, and I didn't make that up. I got that from a video I saw a few years ago by Tone Junkie right here. He had a video called You Can't Hear Reverb, and I remember it being very intriguing, and when I listened to that video, I was like, blown away. What he does, I'm not going to play the video, but I just reviewed it because it's been a while since I saw it, but he plays a clip with just some delays, his tone minus reverb, and then he adds this very washy reverb, and you're like, whoa, those two tones are completely different. And then he puts both of those tones in a mix. Not that different. Yes, you can maybe tell that there's a difference. One has some reverb applied, but it's not as drastic, not nearly as drastic as you might would assume. Hearing the tones in isolation, you would think one is just way too washy. And I know people come at this at different opinions. Some people like really wet reverb, and some people like their tone really, really dry. And I go back and forth depending on what mood I'm in. But I got an email recently from someone who just downloaded the Expanse pack, Landon, and he said, hey, how come when I import the preset like the new Spencer preset, if you don't know, the Expanse pack ever-growing collection of presets, go click it down below. Tons of presets in there. You pay once, you get updates for life. How come when I download the new Spencer preset in the Expanse pack, the reverb and delay sounds so much bigger than it did on the video? Could it be that I'm not used to that much reverb and delay? And I responded to him, and we've had some conversation, and I think probably yes. And part of the problem is, as guitarists, as worship guitarists, we dial in our tone in isolation, and we like that beefy low end, and we get it sounding exactly like we think we like it, and then we get to where we're gonna play and we're like, hey, that tone doesn't sound as good. How do I dial in tone at home when it's gonna sound good in a mix? Well, there's a lot that goes into that, and that could be a huge topic, but one of the main things is reverb and delay. Today we're gonna be talking specifically about reverb, and I'm gonna show you the same thing. I did a little test. I'm not trying to prove that you can't hear reverb. I'm just trying to prove that you can't hear the amount of reverb that you think you can. Here are my two tones, one without reverb and one with reverb. With reverb. Now, these may sound like extreme settings to you, but they are exactly how they are in the Expanse pack. Here's my Hey Worship Leader Spencer preset. Here is the delay. It's set up a quarter note. Now you can actually, toggle between the scale, eighth, and dotted, but we're on quarter, and the mix was only at 30% on the delay. But as far as the reverb, we went from no reverb to reverb. So there was no reverb on this preset right here, this sound right here. And then the reverb. Super washy, super ambient. So is that too ambient? Well, let me show you a little experiment that I did. So I took a little section out of a new song we just introduced at our church called Beautiful Jesus. I played just this random lead line in the mix right before the bridge, I think, or maybe coming out of the bridge. And one has that reverb, it's the same preset, and one I clicked the reverb off. So here's with the reverb. And the same riff, pretty much as close as I could get it, without reverb. You hear how that trails off nicely? There's no reverb on that. That's just the delay. So now let's hear them in a mix. Here we go. right, so those are two different clips. What do you think? Let me know down below. Which one is your preference? Maybe this is more of a preference thing. The thing I'm trying to prove is not how much reverb you need, but that the reverb amount that you need is probably more than you think it needs to be, wherever you are on the spectrum. To me, B here without reverb sounds fine. It doesn't sound bad, but it does sound less polished because reverb kind of gives us this, it cushions everything. It puts a nice pillow around everything. It gives some space. Like one of the main points from this video, you can't hear reverb, that I love that he made is that like delays and stereo width give us a sense of space, right? It gives us right and left, and that's what delays do. But reverb is unique in that it gives us depth perception. It gives us space back and forth. It makes us feel like we're in a, not like a real 3D space, not just stereo, but an actual space. It creates distance, and a lot of times that distance is what we want. It sounds more polished. It sounds more natural. So like I said, I'm gonna play these again, back and forth, and A and B them. I want you to let me know down below which one's your preference and which one you think sounds the best. I'm gonna play the one without reverb first. Can you believe that those two tones are actually a lot different? A lot of reverb, that is the difference between those two, because in the mix, it just sounds like a little reverb was applied and it just smooths everything out. What do you think? Okay, another thing. When I was looking at some other videos, I do this all the time. I may look for supplemental tutorial videos to give to my volunteers, and a lot of times I'll watch videos like this from the Austin Stone where they walk through their gear and the pedal boards and how they play their sounds. And I've noticed in isolation, I'm like, wow, their tone is really wet, like tons of delay, tons of reverb. This one's just an example. I'm not gonna play it for you because it's their video, go look it up. But when they play it in the mix, you're like, oh, well, that sounds normal. It doesn't sound amateur, if you will. It feels like it fits in the mix. It just smooths everything over. So the point is, use more reverb and perhaps delay than you think you need to. All right, so you might be thinking, okay, Jimmy, I hear what you're saying, but how do I go about dialing in reverbs then? Well, here are some tips. First of all, I like to dial in my decay. I'm using Helix right now. And here's my parameters. I like to dial in my decay for the song or the part of the song that I'm on. And then I dial in the mix to taste, meaning I dial in the mix depending on what is needed. You may be in the room and it just sounds too wet. Then just back off the mix. Everything else stays the same. Now for this example, I increased the mix to 50. So 50 is the most reverb you can get without starting to lose your own tone. This is 100% wet right here. So 50 is, in case you're looking at this and you don't understand, 50 is all the way wet and all the way dry, 100, 100. So dial in your decay for the part or the song, and then dial in mix. Like when you get to the live room, you can tweak the mix depending on what you need. Same goes with delays. I like to set my feedback depending on the part. A lot of times I just want around 4 repeats or 4 or 5 repeats. Sometimes I might want a lot longer repeats, like the sound I had this time. Let's see. About 4 or 5 repeats. So I set the feedback ahead of time. I set my mix at what I think I want. And then when I get to the venue or I get with the band, I set my mix in, which leads to my second part. Serve the song, obviously, play the part of the song. I heard from another guitarist one time that sometimes half the part of that you're supposed to be playing is the effects themselves. It's not just the notes on the guitar. So serve the song, play the part with the correct effects. Second is serve the room or the venue. Every room sounds different. Small rooms have a certain sound. Large rooms have tons of reverb already built into them. So serve the room you're in. It may change from week to week. You might play it a bunch of different places. I play the same place most of the time, but when I switch to another place, I can see how my tone changes a little bit, and it's often that I'll increase or decrease the mix on my reverb. So serve the song, serve the room, and then serve the band that you're in. If you're just playing by yourself and you're hearing your electric guitar in isolation, you probably don't need this much reverb. But if you're playing in a full band, maybe 5 or 6 other parts, you have synth, maybe you got Ableton tracks along with you, plus the vocals, don't be afraid to increase the mix on these wet effects. One other thing I wanted to point out is when you do use really wet reverbs, remember to use your pre-delay. If you do not know what pre-delay is, it sets a small delay of your attack. So you hit the string, the transient on the note, and then the reverb blooms in. And so if you bring all this away, the reverb blooms in immediately. If you set this really far, it's like, so you can still have this big ambient reverb, but also still hear the original tone of your guitar. One other thing I want to throw in when using big ambient reverbs and delays is if they have any modulation built in, like motion, don't be afraid to use it, especially on delays. Now I know this is a reverb video, but I love this transistor tape in the Helix because it has this wow and flutter parameter here, and when you have movement, it keeps the big roominess of your reverb and delay from sounding too sterile. All right, so go try it out yourself and let me know down in the comments how it went. How does your tone fit in a mix now that you've made some of these adjustments? If you want to support the channel, check out the EXPANSE pack down below. I'll link it down there. It's ever-growing collection of presets, like I mentioned earlier, for all the Line 6 stuff, the newer stuff, the Helix, HX Effects, XL, HX Stomp, Pod Go, all of it. Go check it out. Thanks. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.